Chapter 14. A long moment of stunned silence followed Pat's announcement of Jethperdo's death. Then Sam said wonderingly, "You had Jeth locked up?" "For what? He was supposed to be sheriff today." "Well, I had a reason to." "And he's dead too?" Ezra broke in. "He was murdered," Pat said back shortly. "He was shot in the face without a chance of shooting back." "By golly, there sure was plenty of excitement in Dutch Springs last night," exclaimed Ezra.
"What are you asking us about him for?"
Sam asked suspiciously. Pat Stevens shrugged. "Well, you were at the bottom of the other devilment."
"And you thought we killed Jeth?"
"Well, it made sense," Pat argued. "Kitty told me about telling you. She'd tried to fix it up with Jeth. And when you decided to take out, I thought maybe you were afraid she'd already told him, and then decided to gun him down too." I never done it, Pat," Ezra assured him earnestly. "I swear, I didn't know he was in that jail when I left Sam there and then went to the bank." He paused suddenly, staring at Sam with his one eye. Pat, too, was watching the small, dark man grimly. Sam blinked at their concentrated attention and asked uneasily,
"What all are you looking at me for?"
Pat drew in a long breath. "You sure you stayed passed out all the time until you woke up this morning tied to your horse?"
"Of course I'm sure. I don't remember nothing."
Pat turned to Ezra. "Was he moving around any? Trying to talk or anything like that?" Ezra shook his head. "Nary a bit." His voice was hoarse. "I don't reckon he moved while I was at the bank." "But you didn't have him tied up then?" Pat asked sharply. "No, I left him laying by his horse. When I left the bank in a hurry, I grabbed him up and carried him to my horse for about half a mile out of town. And then I heard the posse take the wrong fork, and I stopped and put him up in his own saddle." Pat asked Sam, "How many times you say you shot at Ralston before going after your knife?"
"Twice, that's the way I recollect it."
"And have you shot your gun since then?"
"No."
The bewildered look on Sam's dark features were beginning to give way to anger.
"Look here, what are you fellers thinking?"
Pat held out his hand and said steadily, "Let me see your gun." Sam glared at him, then reluctantly dropped his hand to the butt of his holstered .45. He drew it out and flipped it in the air, catching it by the muzzle to present it to Pat butt first, and he growled,
"All right, Sheriff, here you are."
Pat broke it and dropped the unfired cartridges into the palm of his hand. The brass cylinders that had been fired remained in the gun, having been swelled by the explosion so that they wouldn't drop out without being forced. Pat shook his head and extended his open palm for Sam and Ezra to see. "There's only 3 cartridges that haven't been fired." Sam's eyes became frightened. He wet his lips and said hastily,
"Well, it comes out all right. I generally don't carry but 5, leaving the cylinder under the hammer empty so she won't fire if I drop her. There's 3 in your hand, and the 2 I shot at that Ralston, that makes 5.
"Maybe," Pat said. He pushed the plunger that forced the empty brass cartridges out. He shook his head.
"Well, this time you had her loaded up all the way around, Sam. There's 3 empties."
"Tell you what," said Ezra hastily. "I reckon Sam was probably too drunk to count good last night. I've been thinking I heard 3 shots in Kitty's room as opposed to 2. Pat looked at him sharply. "Don't you be lying to me, Ezra." He sounded tired and sad. Ezra shook his red head vigorously. I ain't lying. I swear I ain't. I'll take my oath on it that I heard 3 shots."
"What's the matter with you fellers?" Sam asked wildly. What's the matter where the other bullet went?
Pat replied, Well, I reckon Ezra's thinking's probably the same as mine. That maybe you sort of come to enough while he was at the bank to get up and walk around and try and maybe walk to the window of the jailhouse.
Sam shook his head, declared positively, I don't remember nothing.
Well, maybe you don't remember. Ain't saying you're lying, Sam. I'm wondering if you could have done it without remembering.
Gunned down Jeth Perdot without remembering?
Sam's voice came out in a hoarse whisper. I hope not. I sure hope not, Sam. He flipped the 6-gun shut and handed it back to Sam empty. I guess I better keep these bullets for evidence.
What kind of evidence?
Ezra asked angrily.
I done told you. I'll swear I heard 3 shots in the hotel.
All right, said Pat. Well, then, these'll be evidence that you're telling the truth. He got up and stretched. We better be riding, I reckon.
The both of them looked at him in amazement. You going with us?
Why, I was reckoning you were coming back with me, he told them pleasantly.
No, look here, Pat, Ezra began earnestly. You know
I know doggone well that you 2 yahoos had no business running off like this. How about that Pony Express setup? An express of pain flickered across Sam's ugly face.
Well, that hurts worse than anything. I was sure looking forward to that job riding the mail.
And you too, Pat reminded Ezra. You signed up for the job running that station. They're depending on both of you to carry that first batch of mail today. Think how it'll look if Dutch Springs falls down on the job. They'll say there's going to be the governors and everything in Denver when the first rider gets there, and the President of the United States' own self has got a letter riding in that mail pouch.
I sure would hate to let the President down, Ezra added mournfully. But there just ain't no way getting round it, Pat. Sam, here he'll have to stand trial for murder if he shows his face back in Dutch Springs again.
I ain't so sure about that. Pat shook his head slowly.
What do you mean?
Pat shrugged his shoulders. I told you all that I got into Miss Kitty's room first and carried Sam's knife out. Sam's jaw dropped.
You don't mean you'd cover up for me, Pat?
We've been friends a long time, Pat reminded him gruffly.
Sure, but I still don't like for you to have to do a thing like that. Hell, Pat, you just can't. I ain't gonna let you. Not with the way you was feeling about Lon and all, and you still got the sheriff's oath you took in Winter's store.
I'll be the judge of what I don't want to do.
No.
Sam shook his head positively.
'Twouldn't be right nohow.
Be just as bad, Pat argued, if I let you go on from here. Both friends stared at him in consternation. What's the difference whether I turn you loose here or let you go back to town and cover up for you? Either way, I've been turning against my oath of law. If I don't arrest you now, I'll be aiding and abetting in your escape. He spread out his hands, helplessly.
Well, that's easy enough,
Ezra snorted. He drew his gun and covered the Powder Valley Sheriff.
We'll just take your gun off you, and that way you can't help yourself.
What good'll that do? Snorted Pat wrathfully. I'll still know I could have taken you back if I'd tried. I tell you it's this way. You go back with me and let me see what I can fix up. Or I have to ride the border with you.
You? Take the Owl Hoot Trail with us?
Gasped Sam. I don't see nothing else for it, if you're going to be stubborn and ride that way yourselves.
You can't do that, Pat. You belong in Powder Valley. There's Sally and there's Doc.
Yeah, it would be kind of hard on them, Pat muttered.
You'd dang near kill Sally,
Sam told him angrily.
And you want your boy to grow up knowing his pappy was a crooked sheriff that rode off with a bunch of outlaws instead of arresting them?
Pat shrugged helplessly. What else can I do? Only way out of it is for you to come back with me. I have an idea, he added slowly, that I can work things out so that won't be no trouble over them killings. And the bank robbing, well, if you just took your own money, I reckon you can't be held for taking something that already belonged to you. Well, we'd rather go on, Pat, Ezra told him wistfully. Well, then I'm riding with you if you do.
You dang stubborn fool.
Sam swore softly. His voice was choked with emotion. He abruptly turned his back on Pat and walked away. Don't do it, Pat, Ezra implored him. Shucks me and Sam, we don't matter. We're kind of tired of Powder Valley anyhow. We need to change the scenery. And we both got a yearning to see what's down on the other side of the border. You lie, said Pat quietly. You've both been as proud as peacocks to get that Pony Express job. It's something big and important for the West, and they need you two to help run it right. Sam turned and came back.
There's no use arguing with them, he told Ezra savagely. You know that as good as me. Stubbornest damn fool west of the Mississippi when he sets his mind on something. And he's right, too, Sam went on swiftly. No use for you riding off into trouble with me. I got it. I wouldn't have let you if I'd been in my right mind last night. And then this morning when I come to, it was too late. You'd already busted into the bank and carried me off. We'll ride back with you, Pat.
Sam's dark features tightened recklessly.
I'll make that first ride into Dutch Springs of the mail. And after that, well, we'll see what happens.
Exactly as though he could read Sam's mind, Pat knew what the wiry little man was planning. He'd make that first mail ride, and then he'd confess to killing Fred Ralston to prevent Pat from breaking his oath by covering up for him. There was no use in discussing that now. Pat knew Sam would deny it violently if he accused him of having that up his sleeve. And Pat still had hopes that he could fix things up to keep Sam out of jail. He didn't rightly know just exactly how everything would work out, but he had the glimmer of hope, of a plan. A lot depended on getting Sam back to the Pony Express station in time to carry that first mail sack, as Lon Estes had announced in town that Sam would do. So he added gruffly, Well, that's fair enough. We've got just about time to make it back to the station in time for both of you to take over like nothing had happened. And like you say, Sam, we'll see how things turn out after you made that first ride. He went back to the clump of juniper where he had left the bay mare, mounted her, and rode back to rejoin his two friends on the trail. Sam looked up at him curiously as he rode up and asked,
Weren't you riding a roan when you tried to come up the windrow cabin?
Yeah, that was Big Red. I threw the pack saddle on him and turned him loose to go home when I saw my only chance to head you off was by riding over the mountain and down that slide.
You must have been figuring on a long ride, bringing a lead horse and a pack saddle.
I figured I'd trail you down into New Mexico if you'd gone across the pass.
And how'd you know we didn't?
Well, I stopped at Estes Ranch. Lon told me you hadn't rode that way.
Did he know that you were after us?
No, no one knows it. Like I said, no one knows you killed Ralston or held up the bank. I reckon Kitty Lane and Joe Dems, they'll keep their mouths shut till I have a talk with them. Sam Sloan nodded as though that satisfied him, and the three strung out in single file on the trail and put their horses to a gallop. The sun was almost directly overhead, showing that there was little time to spare for Sam and Ezra to reach the Pony Express way station in time to speed the first pair of mailbags on the new north-south route into Dutch Springs. End of chapter 14.